children as well. So pornography is a function of injustice. And you can see how racist it is as well, how subject to class, how, who is used in pornography and who is not.
It's interesting you say that, because even many of the porn narratives in India are about the submissive woman who's being penetrated from every part of her body, and she's saying no and crying, but she also says, give me more. So it sends out confusing messages about what is sex, and people confuse the difference between sex and sexual exploitation now. And they think it's all the same because it's seen from the masculine point of view. And you've also talked about how this cult of masculinity is created and develops through the kind of family structure we have, and how that leads to fascism also being played out in the nation state. And you have a chapter in this book called about if Hitler were alive, whose side would he be on? How do you think this cult of masculinity starts inside the family and inside the home?
Well, it's important also to say it didn't always exist, right? There are very early cultures that were matrilineal. There are many languages in this and in my country that don't even have he and she. They don't have gendered pronouns. So, because the adversary gets to us, I think, by saying there's no choice, that it's always been this way and it always will be this way. But the basic thing that happened over time in different cultures is patriarchy, which means that men took over the power or controlled reproduction. It's all about controlling reproduction. If women didn't have wombs, we'd be fine. Right? So then on top of that comes caste, race, all these, which means you have to control the so-called superior women and keep them sexless and on a pedestal in order to keep the superior group pure, and you exploit the less powerful women. So it grew in different ways in different places, but all over the world you see that among women's first demands is reproductive freedom, is I get to decide, when and whether I'm going to have children. And I think as an extension of that, the power of the state, of society, of whatever it is, stops at our skins, men and women. Our bodies belong to ourselves.
Let's talk about prostitution then, because one of the big challenges I have had doing my own work, because Apne Aap Women Worldwide, my organization, works against sex trafficking, and we go inside red light areas and slums and among communities known as denotified criminal tribes suffering from intergenerational prostitution, to help them resist prostitution, but also challenge something which is like a split inside the feminist movement itself, which is that some people say that prostitution should be legalized, and that might help women get some rights within the system of prostitution. And we feel that acceptance of prostitution is like the acceptance of commodification and the sexual exploitation of women. And we've had several conversations about that. You've come with me to Sonagachi, to communities in Forbesganj, Bihar, etc. So when you say that it stops at the skin, then how do we communicate this with the feminist movement, and how can feminist movements across our countries work together to find the language to be able to explain that?
Well, if you just look in general, as we know, at prostitution, wherever men and women are more equal, there is less prostitution. And wherever we are less equal, there is more prostitution. It's about economic alternatives. It's about who decides, so we need, in a big way, to provide alternatives. But also, I think we got stuck in the either or, that also comes cultures that are into masculine and feminine. They think there are only two alternatives. In my press, they're always saying there are two sides to every issue, and I'm always saying, wait a minute, maybe there are six, maybe there are four. I mean, we get falsely divided. So we've been thinking about legalization versus criminalization. And criminalization makes no sense because you end up criminalizing the victim. And legalizing makes no sense because the it just opens up. I mean, in the one county in the United States where it is legal, it's where sex-trafficked women and girls are taken to be broken in. You know, I mean, it's, and also, and I'm afraid my country did this, to call it sex work, which I think was done in all goodwill. You know, if it's a job like any other, then in that county, in Nevada, in Germany, and in other countries that have legalized, if it's work like any other, if you don't do it, you don't get unemployment, you don't get welfare. I mean, you know, words have consequences. So the good news, I think, is that we have discovered that what works best is a third way. And that means decriminalizing the women or the children or the men, whoever, the prostituted people, decriminalizing them, not arresting them, offering them alternatives, actually listening to them to hear what it is they want, and penalizing the customers, not criminalizing the customers unless they've committed some clearly criminal act, but penalizing them and informing them about the huge sex trafficking industry that is now bigger than drugs and almost as big as arms in the world. Because a lot of people just don't know the industry that they're contributing to. So Sweden and other Nordic countries have done this. The French Parliament just voted to approach it this way. You know, it's going to be a long struggle because it has to do with power and powerlessness, but I think we're beginning to understand much better how to approach it.
Actually, that's interesting, and you know what I have realized is by working with Gloria over the last 10 years is how movements can collaborate across countries and boundaries, and I do want to share that story, is that when I started working in Sonagachi and Khidirpur in the red light areas of Kolkata, the biggest challenge that we had was from NGOs who were funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they had set up condom distribution programs inside the red light area, and basically these condom distribution programs were to protect male buyers from disease rather than protecting the women and girls from the male buyers. And systems were set up where peer educators who were pimps and brothel owners were hired, and they were given targets to go inside brothels and give out 100 condoms or 200 condoms every week, and they were given salaries by NGOs to do so, and these salaries actually came through other intermediary organizations funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who had hired McKinsey to design the AIDS control program for India. And McKinsey, being a marketing company, had of course looked for a product, and the product they found was the condom, and most of the McKinsey employees were men. And this is the danger of having mostly men in decision-making positions, because when they imagined the vulnerable person or the person in need of protection from AIDS, they imagined the 45-year-old man who was visiting the brothels, not the 14-year-old girl or the 19-year-old woman who was locked up inside the brothel and who had no negotiating power, who could not say no to unwanted sex, let alone to unprotected sex. And so they set up these big condom distribution programs, and the source was in the United States. So I contacted Gloria. We'd already been working together. She'd been to our programs and met with the women, sat in circles with them, and we met with other feminists in the United States. And together we basically ran a campaign on every space we got. If there was a conference in the United Nations, if Equality Now, another NGO, was doing a meeting somewhere, which Gloria is also the chair of, I would be there. Go to speak in Washington to senators about it. Any space that we would get, we would organize, and all of us would speak up. And 10 years later, now the Bill and Melinda Gates has stopped that program, has stopped funding the program. So it's possible to literally organize across countries, and sometimes to challenge what is coming from America and to mention the harm that it does in the name of doing good is really important, because now we will have another big challenge like FDI, the foreign direct investment. Mm-hmm. And it's going to take away the rights of workers and farmers who will be supplying, and retail workers. And again, the majority of them are going to be women, and again, we will need to organize. Mm-hmm. So can you give us any examples of organizing besides the one we did together, where we have actually had successes with people here? Because we have many more struggles ahead right now.
Well, I was just thinking when you were speaking about, I mean, I don't know why feminism is viewed as some Western or Northern idea, because it's everywhere, and I learned so much from Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, you know, who is here, and Ambedkar, who wrote your constitution, was very clear about the connection between sex and caste, that you couldn't continue caste without controlling the bodies of women. I mean, it's just organic, you know, wherever we are. Now, at the other end of this spectrum, we find ourselves with the same adversaries. Walmart. That's, you know, it's the biggest retailer in the world. They oppress their employees and underpay their employees. They discriminate against women. They have sweatshops in China. You know, they, even in the States, destroy the local merchants where they are. And, you know, so I came here once, I don't know, a decade ago, and Walmart was trying to get in. And so I sent a documentary that had been done in the States called The High Cost of Low Prices. And it was translated, and at that point, you know, we managed to keep Walmart out. I mean, it's a continuing struggle, but I just want to say, I was trying to think of a example that we can imagine doing, you know, ourselves. And, you know, there are many such ways, I think, that, listen, the multinational corporations treat the world as if there were no boundaries. We need to help each other in reasonable, smart ways, as if there were no boundaries.
But when we start treating the world with no boundaries, we also have to remember that ideas are the ones which are crossing. And in this book, you've mentioned that many of the lessons that you learned, and you didn't even realize that you were learning them at that point, was something which you used in feminist struggles in America later. So what were those lessons that you learned which helped you? Because I know that when I met you, I connected more with you than any other feminist, because there was something I was learning organically growing up in a socialist household in India, Gandhian household in India, where you know, change begins from the bottom, and how the craft movement, as you mentioned, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, and organizing of cooperatives with people who are peasants and in the village actually then brings about change right at the top and changes the nature of the economy. And that the radical feminism that you talk about means going to the root, which is really not about changing things within a framework, but transforming the framework itself. So if you would talk about what were those things that you learned and how did you learn it a little bit?
Well, I wouldn't want to suggest to you that I knew what I was doing when I was 22. I was wandering around in India. I had come here because my mother was a theosophist, and so I had a feeling about India. Also, I was engaged and trying not to get married. I mean, you know, I don't I don't want to suggest, I mean, I think we follow our interests without even knowing why, you know. But I ended up, or in the process of living here for a couple of years, I knew about the land reform movement in Vinoba Bhave, so I wanted to learn more. And I went to a center, a land reform, a small center in the Ramnad or near the Ramnad area at a time when there were caste riots in that area. So it turned out that there was almost no one left there because teams had gone out to walk through the villages and try to express that people outside knew what was happening, cared what was happening. And they had run out of women. So they said, would I join the team? I said, don't you think it'd be a little odd, you know, that I'm... And they said, no, you would be no more odd than somebody from New Delhi. They said, it's okay. So I went walking with a cup, a comb, and a sari in the classic way. The villagers looked after us, fed us. We had meetings at night around kerosene lamps where people told the horrendous things that had happened and perhaps even the more horrendous things they feared might happen. And I just witnessed how important it is that we're communal creatures. We need to talk to each other. We need support. We need, if we're by ourselves, we feel crazy, alone. And I was all the time hearing the Gandhian principles. You know, if you want to know how people live, you have to go where they live. If you want people to listen to you, you have to listen to them. If you know, And I saw it, and I must have absorbed it, though it took me a long time to understand that it applied to social change altogether. And for my years here, I would have continued to think that change starts at the top, which is part of the way we're kept passive, you know, sitting there waiting for change to start at the top. And I would not have understood that actually it comes from the bottom. It comes from what you and I do every day. It's like a tree. You know, I always said that it was like a tree. I've been saying that for years. Then yesterday we met with Ilabat and Sewa women and so on, and they say a banyan tree. And I thought, how much better is that as an image? Because there are many roots. You know, and there's Ilabat, who's the main root, and then there are all these other groups, and there are 1,000,009 women who are part of her network now. So forevermore now, I'm going to say change is like a banyan tree.
There were other things that you taught me as an organizer. The first time that Gloria and I met, I took her in an auto rickshaw to a slum in Delhi, and we spoke to a group of 25 women in the middle of a drizzle down a narrow lane with vendors and dogs and screaming children and all of it. And I thought the women are going to run away. They're not going to listen to Gloria because language is a barrier. The truths are too far apart. She comes from a rich country. This is a poor neighborhood. And Gloria spoke her truth to them. She said that she had had an abortion a long time ago, and she kept it a secret for a long time. And then she explained why she kept it a secret. And the women immediately connected because they too knew why they had kept secrets at home and why they had to keep doing it. And she taught me in that moment that if you share a truth with the people that you're trying to organize, then they will connect with you. And I kept testing the truth over the years, and I found that yes, the circle of women that I had connected with from 25 grew to 15,000 and more growing. But the other thing she taught me, because I was always worried as an organizer, as a feminist, that, you know, am I doing the right thing? I used to be a journalist. I really don't know what's going on in their lives. Am I authentic? And she said, do whatever you do as if it matters, however small or big it is. Only time will show you whether it's big or small. And I truly, truly appreciate that advice, because now really I can see that there were some very small things I did which I thought were completely inconsequential, which have had huge impact. And there were things when I went to address the UN General Assembly, and I feel they've had no impact except adding on to my CV. So, you know, you just don't know what's happening. And today in the feminist movement in India, which is burgeoning and growing, and you met so many feminists in the last week, what were the lessons that you learned from them? What was the feeling and the energy that you got talking to Kavita or to Vandana, Kavita Krishnan or Vandana Shiva, or any of the people you met, or the women of Apne Aap, when you sat in a circle with them and they'd come from the red light area to meet you and spoke about their truth?
No, how can I say? I mean, there's no magic that I know of in the world greater than sitting in a small group, big enough, I mean, not so big, but what everyone can speak and everyone can listen, discovering you're not crazy, you're not alone, realizing that it's all about balance. You know, if you come from a powerful group, maybe you have to learn how to listen as much as you talk. If you come from a less powerful group, you have to learn how to talk as much as you listen. And you know, you find yourself saying something you thought only happened to you, then all these other people say, yeah, that happened to me too. So you realize that if it happened to unique people, and we each are unique, then it must be political. And if we get together, we can do something about it. And I just hope from the bottom of my heart, you know, I don't know what's in the lives of each of us here, but that you feel something, you focus on something that you want to change, you find other people who are experiencing the same thing, and begin to do it together. It is, I mean, the art of behaving effectively just really is behaving as if everything you do matters. No matter how small it is. I mean, I have done, as you were saying, testifying. I've testified to Congress, nothing. You know, I prepared for weeks, nothing. You know, but it just connecting two people. You know, I mean, has turned out, to my surprise, I mean, I think we should be starting questions, right? So I'll just tell you one story, which is the parable of, to me, the parable of the fence, and maybe that's, our minds work on narrative, right? We need stories. That's why we're here, right? And this took place in Zambia, in a very rural area where I had been at a conference on sex trafficking. I went to this rural area. I thought, good, there can't be sex trafficking here. This is an area of big game and small villages and so on. But no, there were a couple of women who had gone to Lusaka and disappeared on the streets. So we sat in a circle of women. It could have been men too, but in this case it was women, just talking to each other. I thought, okay, it's not going to work this time. Too much difference in language, like you were saying. We're sitting on a tarpaulin in the middle of a field next to the Zambezi River. It's just not going to work this time. But it worked because they sang a song and they laughed at me because I can't sing. And one woman who was a widow started telling how she had been systematically over the years beaten by her husband and only now felt safe saying so because she was a widow. And she started to cry, and other people started to comfort her, and people started to tell the truth. So I said, why did those two women go to Lusaka? They needed cash for their kids' school fees. They needed money for maize because that's their staple crop, and that's why they went. So I said, well, what would help? Because the people who have the problem always know what would help. And they said, what we need is an electrified fence because we grow these fields of maize and the elephants come in as soon as it's high enough and they eat the maize and then we have no crop and so on and so on. So I raised not a lot of money for an electrified fence. And I went back the next year and they cleared this huge field all by them, by hand. They had a bumper crop of maize. They had enough for food security for a year, enough to sell for school fees for their kids. The maize was in big bags underneath trees. We sang songs to the maize. We danced to the maize. I discovered, do you know the disco dance, the bump? Is anybody here? Okay, I'm sure that's where it came from because that's definitely what we were doing. But if somebody had said to me, what is a cure for sex trafficking, I wouldn't have said an electrified fence, okay? That's why we need to listen to each other. People who have the problem have some ideas for solutions, and if we do it together, it actually works. And I can't tell you the joy of those women, and I will never forget it, and now I'm telling you the story. Maybe you will remember it too. And we all have something in our lives that we know we can do to make it better. And we need to do it together, and we need to do it even if we don't think it's going to matter. Remember, the flap of a butterfly's wing is supposed to change the weather, right? So we make one hell of a butterfly here, I would say.
We have 10 more minutes to questions. I want to ask two more things. One is that, so does feminism mean an electric fence to you? What does feminism mean to you?
Well, feminism basically just means what it says in the dictionary, which is the belief in the full social, economic, political equality of women and men. And men are feminists, women are feminists. I mean, it just, one day we won't need a word because it will be reality and we won't need to distinguish ourselves, but it's still pretty far from reality. So we need a word. But you don't have to, if you want to use a different word, I mean, in English, we say women's liberationist, we say womanist, we say girls with 2 or 3 R's, which I love. In Spanish, mujerista, you can pick your word, but right now I think if we don't have a word, we don't send a signal, and that means we don't get support.
And the other thing which is going to be a huge challenge in the coming years for the feminist movement in India, I feel, is the growth of the religious right and it getting entrenched across cultures and across states and across generations. And the backlash that we will have to face to the growing feminism in India from the religious right. How have you countered it, and what suggestions can you give to us?
As I'm sure you know, we have our religious right too, big time. And I think in a deep sense, we have succumbed to the idea that religion, you can't talk about religion, but actually religion is just politics in the sky. And so if God is man, man is God. Even when I was a child, I wondered how come Jesus had blonde hair and blue eyes in the middle of the Middle East. It's about racism, right? Now, you have more variety of gods, which I admire, because that helps, you know. But I do think, speaking for myself, I think about spirituality, which means the essence to me of God and all living things, and is profoundly democratic. It connects us to nature, it connects us to each other. Religion is profoundly political. And the withdrawal of God from nature and women, which happened at distinct times in history in different places. If you make that trip on the Nile, you know, from the old Nubian part to Cairo, you can see it in the carvings. That first there was a lot of nature, and God was everything, and there was a goddess, and so on. And then you go a couple thousand years later, or 1,000 years later, and the goddess has a son and no daughter, and suddenly there's not so many birds, and there's, you know, I mean, you can just see it gradually being withdrawn, the sense of God from women and nature, to make it okay to conquer women and nature. And Henry Breasted, who was a great Egyptologist, said, monotheism is but imperialism in religion. Interesting. So we need to be able to talk about it. Otherwise, we've succumbed to secrecy, basically, and to not looking at the power relationships in our whole lives.
But Gloria, how do we challenge this conservative backlash? Because one of the things which is happening is there are more women in public places, we are getting more jobs, we are more educated, we are claiming public places. And the backlash has been this whole relentless spate of rapes at the workplace, behind a mill compound, walking down a street, taking a bus. And the answer has been through, some people are saying that we should not go home after 6 o'clock, or we should wear different kinds of clothes, or some people are even saying they will not employ women. How are we going to challenge this?
Well, I mean, we don't correct a crime by restricting the victim. We correct a crime by addressing the criminal, right? Women should be, everybody, including women, should be free. These streets belong to us. Public spaces belong to us. We need to look not only at the victim, but the victimizer. Let's see why young men are doing this. Because they didn't invent this either, but they got born into a male-dominant culture, and you can see that most rapes in my country too are conducted in groups. Most rapes don't involve penises, they involve objects and knives and broom handles, and it's about hatred. It's about feeling that you can only be a man, a dominant creature, by destroying even a female, at least by controlling a female, and perhaps by so. We need, in a long-term sense, not just to raise our daughters more like our sons, but our sons more like our daughters, not to cut off the empathy that all kids have by telling them to be masculine one way or another, culturally speaking. And we need to we need to make the streets safe for women, not women safe from the streets, not restricted and imprisoned.
And And what do you think, how useful is this book going to be for us? You've been having so many conversations in the last 1 week with different women and different feminists and different people from the movement, and you've seen that there's a commonality in our inequalities in the United States or India or Europe or Africa. So could you talk a little bit about that before we open up the floor for questions? You know, where do you see these commonalities in our inequalities?
Really, Ruchira, I have faith in your judgment that you picked things. I mean, I never would have thought, for instance, that she would have picked doing an expose of the Playboy Club, because I didn't know that the Playboy Club was now trying to, it's long gone in the States, and now they're trying to impose itself on you. I just didn't know that. I hadn't thought about the deep connection between authoritarian fascist groups, right-wing groups, so on. I mean, I see it in my own country, but I didn't know enough to see it here, so that whole, you know, the beginning of fascism, which the first thing that Hitler did when he came to power was to padlock the family planning clinics and declare contraception and so on a crime against the state, to restrict women to Kinder, Kirche, Kuchen. I mean, you know, it was a movement, a backlash movement against the women's movement in Germany, which was the most powerful in the world, I think, at the time, and also against the gay and lesbian movement. That's another, yes, important to say that, because I don't know what your experience is, but when I'm wandering around campuses, kids will say to me, why are the same groups against contraception and lesbians? And it seems odd on its face, but it's not, because they're against any sexual expression that cannot end in childbearing. So we see that the groups that are against female equality are also against gays and lesbians and transgender. I mean, you know, I just hope that our enemies don't understand our shared interests better than we do, because so we need to keep seeing, as I was saying, those interdependencies. Also, no, it was fascinating to me to see what Ruchira picked and what people pick up. And we were in a bookshop together, and the interest was in an essay in here called "Romance versus Love," and it was trying to make the point that romance is the most intense form of curiosity. You know, romance is two incomplete people looking for the rest of themselves in each other, which makes it fun and, you know, I'm not knocking romance, but it also makes it limited, you know, because once the curiosity, first of all, nobody can be the rest of yourself, but once the curiosity is satisfied, then it goes away. Love is concern for I mean, somebody said love is when you want what's best for the other person. Romance is when you want the other person. You know? So, I don't know, look and see what you think. See, you know, I hope you find something useful, supportive, something in here, and I hope you tell me what you find useful and supportive. I'll take it home with me.
And we're really looking forward to questions, because I'm sure many of you do, and there are people with mics, so. Mm-hmm.
Thank you to both of you for your work. You've already given a lot of very useful advice about change coming from the bottom, listening and organizing. Could you give a couple other suggestions on how we can move feminism forward in our everyday life?
Mostly, I shouldn't say mostly because I don't know exactly, but I think one of the problems is we have low standards. You know, so we think, I mean, the simplest example is that we think of change in terms of women doing what men have done, but we don't look at it in terms of men doing what women have done. So as a result, women end up with two jobs, one outside the home, one in, And children don't grow up knowing that men can be as loving and nurturing as women. It's a libel on men to say that that is not true. And if we don't experience as children nurturing men, if we only see cold, distant men, we think that that's inevitable. And then we repeat that inhumanity as we go, you know, because it's familiar, it feels like home. But I would say if I was going to pick I don't know if I can, but anyway, the one thing that we as women and men have yet to really, really, really deeply explore, it's shared parenthood, really men raising children as much as men do, because that undermines the whole obsession with masculinity and control of females and so on, which also leads to violence. Democracy, you don't get democracy outside the home unless you have democracy inside the home.
Hi, my name is Meera. I'm from Lahore. I went to Mount Holyoke. I know you're a Smith alum. So I just wanted to say that. And I wanted to commend you on your contribution to the feminist movement. I think all of us are, you know, living here and like living as we do because of the movement that you were part of at that time. I wanted to sort of go back to sort of these new strands of feminism that have emerged in the West. And sort of these are called imperialist feminisms in the way that they're sort of looking at the women of the East. And particularly we saw this in the coverage post the Nirbhaya rape, and we really didn't get enough coverage of the women who were out, you know, on the streets, more so about the violence and about the particular stereotype of the Indian man. So I wanted to talk about
If you can just look at me, because I can see who's
how do we exactly achieve a collaboration between different feminist movements on an equal footing, where we don't have one side, you know, saying that we have to rescue the Eastern woman.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm sure that there were women in the U.S. who were messing up in their coverage of violence here. I'm not saying that everybody was right, but it is also true that in our press in general, only 3% of the clout positions, that is, the people who can decide what to cover, what stories to cover, are occupied by women. So, you know, if you look at what we could control on the web and in our stories and as writers, we were celebrating, I and everybody I know was celebrating that women and men were out in the street taking back the street and energized, and, you know, we were not, I mean, you know, every country has violence. Many African American women responding positively in public opinion polls as there were white women, and at the same time, I think here people were saying, well, feminism is okay for rich white countries over there, and it's so insulting because it renders invisible Kamala Davis. I mean, it renders invisible your own. Here it is from the ground. It's always been there. Feminist movement. Some of this is assisted by the current press, and some of it is assisted by the incompleteness of history. You know, we still are studying a pretty restricted version of history.
Hi, yeah. I just wondered that, you know, a lot of bright, educated women say, okay, we are not feminists. They don't like the brand feminism. They don't like to be called feminists. And yet they believe in gender parity and, you know, equal pay for equal. So why is it? And do you think that's a failure of the feminist movement that you've not been able to kind of...
No, I think that, I think it's real. You know, if you say, I believe in equal pay, but I'm not a feminist, you're saying, I want equal pay for myself, but not for anybody else. So if you say you're a feminist, you're talking about equal pay for everybody. This is a big revolution. You do get opposition. But the truth of the matter is it doesn't work as an individual solution. And gradually, I think, you come to understand that. But this, and then, I don't know what you have here, but in we have people like Rush Limbaugh, who every week calls me a feminazi. You know, there are people distorting and
Blaming.
bad-mouthing the word. So I guess it's probably divided into two things. The problem is people who don't know what it means, and if you send them to the dictionary and they say, oh, well, yeah, you know, like in the States now in polls, 60% of women and almost 40%, 35% of men say, yes, I'm a feminist because they know what it means. But there are people who are against it because they know what it means. It is not a public relations movement, it's a revolution. So it does have adversaries.
Thank you very much for your presentation and the question answer session. I just want to ask you, in your own country, your people are not willing to elect a woman as a president. This has been proved quite often, and even Hillary Clinton lost it almost at the nomination stage itself. In our country, we have had a woman prime ministers, and now we have 5 women heading their various parties, one of them including the Congress, 128-year-old party. But still, you know, women are not in decision making as they should be. And is it because of that you think that things are not improving? And secondly, even if you have 33% reservation, which some of the women organizations are demanding, once they come, is there any guarantee that they are going to fight for the progress of women? Because as of now, despite these 5 women heading the different parties, and 3-4 of them are even chief ministers, I don't see much results as far as women are concerned. So I just need your answer to both these questions. Thank you.
No, it's not about biology, it's about consciousness. So it's not about every individual woman who's going to be positive for other women. Look at Sarah Palin. I mean, you know. And incidentally, her vote was much more men than women, because women could figure out that she wasn't, you know, standing for them. It's about a critical mass of women who do, by all surveys, make a difference, not because we're better people, but because we've had different life experiences. And we haven't been made to feel we have our masculinity to prove. So, you know, a critical mass of women in decision-making does make a difference. Believe me, I point out every minute all the countries that have had female chiefs of state when we have not. There are differences in part because the U.S. considers itself so powerful, hopefully not forever. It might become a citizen of the world eventually. Actually, it's about to become no longer a majority white country, which I think is really great because I think we'll, you know, relate to the world better. But it's also the source of incredible anxiety on the part of our right wing, as you can imagine. They keep saying white women are not having enough children, the white race is committing suicide, you know, they're right. So it's about a critical mass. It's also about the use of talent. If you eliminate half or a third of the of the population, you don't get the same degree of talent. So, you know, we're in a worse shape because we're powerful, so there's more competition for that role. Also, families are not as powerful there as here. So, you know, if Indira Gandhi had had a brother, would he have been prime minister? I mean, you know, it's partly here and in other countries, the power of the family. But I think the interesting thing is that for both of us, it's, as long as both women and men are raised as children, mostly by females, we associate female power with childhood. And it feels irrational and emotional and not appropriate to the outside world. So I think in a long-term basis, men raising children as much as women and women being in the public world as much as men will really change this. We are also changing as we see, not what we're told, right? So it was clear to me that Hillary Clinton could not win last time. But by her very presence and her taking of incredible abuse and conflict, and by her role since then, she's kind of changed the molecules in the air, you know, so I think it's conceivable that she might get elected this time. I don't know.
There's one question from the back because the people at the back haven't had a chance. Do we have time for 2 questions? One question. Okay, so one question at the back at least.
Check.
Yeah. The lady in the orange and purple. Yeah, you. The orange scarf, I meant.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to know, if in your experience, have you come across women who are prostitutes, not trafficked women, but prostitutes, who don't like this idea of being called victims, being for other people, like other institutions like the law, to assume that it's wrong because it's encouraging commodification of the woman's body, because they don't have agency, because they don't have alternatives. Like, have you come across women who, because like you said, the power of other outside institutions stops at our skin, and we own our body. So I mean, I would like to think that there are women who are in the industry because that is how they want to express themselves or use their body or relate to their body. I mean, I'm just asking, have you encountered people like that? Because it would be really inspiring for me to know that there are people like that out there. Because I feel like prostitution, I want to think that we have a very wrong idea of prostitution.
Me too. You know, I mean, I would love to think that women have power wherever they are, and that they're there because they want to be there. And I have met of women who got an academic degree by prostituting themselves, or got on in life in some way by prostituting themselves. They didn't have pimps. They weren't in brothels. I mean, it seems clear that those are very repressive institutions, and the sex industry worldwide, is a very repressive and prostitutes worldwide have a PTSD rate of 65%. It's 5% in the normal population. For Vietnam vets, it's between 30 and 40%. I mean, body invasion is a very, very, very traumatizing. However, like you, I always want to, I have met these women, but then I discovered that both of the women I'm thinking of right now had been sexually abused severely as children and had come to believe they had no other value. So I think the good thing about the third way is that it helps all women and men and kids in prostitution by decriminalizing. I mean, no, they should not be arrested. But I do think, from what I know or see, that body invasion as a kind of work is way more traumatizing than being a prisoner of war, than being in wartime, it's as if our identity is here, right? And to have to sell ourselves causes people to dissociate from their bodies, to dissociate from their lives. So much as I also wanted to feel that those women were empowered, I couldn't. I mean, I support their right to do what they need to do and not to be arrested and not to be harassed and so on, but I didn't end up. And I'll tell you, here's the question I find helpful, because we can't imagine free will in ourselves sometimes. Would you want your daughter to have this job? Because then you can better imagine free will. It's a generation on. And so far, I have only found one woman who said yes, that she could imagine her daughter with the job of prostitution.
And there's so many more questions, but I think our time is up, so I'm just going to ask Gloria if she has any last words before we get off the stage.
Well, I have the last words of an organizer, okay? Do you know each other? Do you know the people who are sitting around you? Okay, here's a instruction just because it's an excuse. Before you leave here or in another, whatever is convenient, introduce yourselves to 3 or 4 people you don't know. Say what you care about, what you're doing. If you came here, I bet you share values and interests. You may end up with a new co-conspirator, a new job, a new love affair. I mean, I don't know. But just do remember that everything we do matters, and and I guess one more thing, remember that the end doesn't justify the means are the ends. So if we want to have love and laughter and music and humor at the end of our revolution, we need to have it along the way, love and laughter and music and humor. So go forth and raise hell, organize, and remember that everybody here makes a difference.
And